Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Fagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from the Wide Left Substack. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, I just watched an unfortunate amount of Mitch Trubisky on a Thursday night, and I can't help but think, that the people who are supposed to draw up plays for him should have remembered that the man can't throw left.
Self-admittedly can't throw left. He said so in his final season with the Bears. He knows he can't throw left. He should be turning down these plays. He should have told the new offensive coordinator, was Joe Brady, I think, been we gotta not that one. Not on fourth down.
What? He needed 2 yards.
Mm-hmm.
He threw it 30.
Mm-hmm.
A ball that there's no way that was going to end up getting caught.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that was the play that was called to him, right? He had to have, audibled out of that, right?
Mm-mm. That was definitely called.
Why?
He knows who he is, man. He knows who he is. He wouldn't have audibled into that. Pretty boy assassin, he knows who he is.
He's at least self-aware enough to go, no, there's not a chance I'm going to hit that.
Yeah, but in as the backup quarterback in a crunch time situation, final 2 minutes of the game, he doesn't have the time to audible into the other. He's just got to do what the thing says. The play has been radioed into his helmet. He's repeated the play. He has absorbed that this will be the end of him. He has contemplated his future.
At what point during that do the other players in the huddle look at him and go, "This is suicide"?
Yeah, are you sure? There's no way the other players are as familiar with this problem as they need to be, first of all, but as Mitch Trubisky or Joe Brady. I feel like maybe the players have heard the meme. Obviously, a bunch of players in the Chicago Bears heard the meme, but I just feel like George Pickens is not all that. First of all, it's George Pickens. He's the ball's headed my way. 100%, I got this. That's who he is, right? But yeah, I don't think Deontay Johnson knows this dude can't throw left, or famously this dude can't throw left. He's well known for not being able to. I don't think the other players were oh, we're done for. Maybe because they were oh, we're gonna throw the ball on 4th and 2 and it's gonna go deep. We're done for. Yeah, that's reasonable. But I don't think any of them are just oh, the first read's to the left. Yeah, we're done. I think they'll find out. I think a bunch of people will be hey, so I don't know if you knew this about your starting quarterback, but he critically cannot throw it to a third of the field. Oh, we should have known. Did they know that? Does the front office know that? I feel like they should know that.
And famously, it's difficult to throw to the left side in that stadium. It's just amazing to at what point during explaining to everybody else in the huddle, do people just start asking, wait, are you sure you got that completely, the name of the play completely from that? It didn't cut out for a second? Some Belichick bit of magic? Is the radio
working fine? Yeah.
Belichick magic, you were missing the second word of the play. It was supposed to be a crosser. Turns out we ran a go for no good reason. Maybe? This was just baffling decision. From a quarterback who was out-dueled by Bailey Zappi tonight. A sentence I was absolutely not expecting.
Can you imagine getting destroyed in a quarterback competition by somebody whose name ends up in that meme board?
Listen, when you lose to Case Cookus, you should legally be required to tweet out Case Cookus. When you lose to Bailey Zappi, you should be legally required to just type in the words Bailey Zappi into Twitter and just hit send. Just be done.
Yeah. You're losing to Aiden, Jaden, Braden, and Caden all at once when you lose to Bailey Zappi.
Yeah. I don't make... I realize this flies in the face of what I'm saying, but I don't make the rules here. This is how it goes. That's absolutely ridiculous. Welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. We are back. We were gone for the bye week stretch, and we are back to talk about the Raiders game that's coming up this weekend. And we have a special bit of national news on what is going on with the Bills right now. We'll handle that the most professional way that we possibly can, and then go into the mailbag as well. But before we start, again, thanks for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to help us financially, help support us, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there for $3.50 a month, or a little bit less for the yearly subscription. You get access to all sorts of stuff like the bonus material, which another episode will be coming out here. And then around Christmas, you'll be getting a second Christmas episode. You guys get your own special clip show. So cool. That's coming. So check that out. You also get access to the Discord, which has been a lot of fun, especially lately. So even if I got bullied into creating a new channel, we'll ignore that. Patreon.com/NorseCode. Check it out. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well. It's a one-time donation thing, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up any number of wonderful Norse Code pieces of merchandise. A number of throw pillows have been purchased recently, and that is just terrifying to think of.
Really?
And comforting.
Man.
Terrifying and comforting.
Not comforting. All terrifying.
I don't know. Apparently they're printed on both sides. That's comforting to me. I mean, you can't just buy it and then decide, wow, this actually is creepy. All right, I'm going to flip it over and just maybe the company isn't going to see it. Oh, no. The company's going to see it. And you can too over at norsecode.threadless.com. Let's get into the preview. We have a preview of the Raiders game that Arif recorded earlier today with Ted Wynn of the Athletics. We're going to head over to that, and we will see you after the interview.
All right, I am with my good friend and former colleague, and I don't know, maybe the best X's and O's guys in the business, Ted Wynn of The Athletic. How you doing, man?
Doing good. Appreciate the nice intro, and I miss you, man. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a bit. I remember us hanging out in California, grabbing some food to eat, and you know all the best places to eat, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, too bad we couldn't get a better meal. If you were in San Jose, San Jose's cool, but like if we went to the city, we would have got a better meal. But
yeah,
it was good hanging with you.
It's the 49ers' fault, it's not.
Yeah.
All right, dig it. Yeah, so you've followed the Raiders for a long time before you're at the Athletic. You had a Raiders blog, in addition to also doing stuff like writing for like USA Football, and I think you had, what was it called, the Coffee House Blitz podcast too back then?
Yeah, that was with the Blue Wire. I was one of the first Blue Wire pods back in the day. Man.
Yeah, you and me, we were like the first bloggers to write for the Athletic. That was crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ted knows his stuff, man. That's why I brought him on. Huge Raiders guy, and has been able to kind of like tell me a lot. I've learned a lot about football from him. So hopefully, we're gonna pick up a little bit here or there about the Raiders before the Vikings play them. But before we talk about any of the individual players, which we'll get to, I kind of want to know a little bit about your thoughts on Antonio Pierce. I mean, it seems like he's a good culture fit, right? But like, what are your total thoughts on this guy, the interim coach? Does he even have a chance to win the full-time head coaching job in this offseason?
I think he does. I mean, I think Mark Davis regretted passing up on Rich Bisaccia for Josh McDaniels. If you don't remember, Rich Bisaccia was the interim coach after Gruden, and he took him to the playoffs where they lost a close wild card game to the Bengals, and afterwards he let go of Rich Bisaccia, and the players really loved Rich, and I think it was just kind of the polar opposite thing with Josh McDaniels. So I really think Mark Davis is going to give Antonio Pierce a chance to win the job. Whether he does it or not remains to be seen. I think winning a couple games right off the bat and then being competitive with a couple of the better AFC teams in the league probably is good for his case. But, as with any interim coach, I think it's an uphill battle.
You think if Harbaugh becomes available, Mark Davis might be a little bit ensorcelled by the prospect of bringing in a Harbaugh to run the team?
I think so. I think I was surprised at their lack of interest the first time around. But I think he was also admittedly very set on Josh McDaniels too. So I think the last two coaching hiring cycles, he had a guy in mind. Like he knew he wanted to hire John Gruden, and he knew he wanted to hire Josh McDaniels. But based on his comments, I think he wants to actually be a little bit more, actually have a real process as far as vetting people and talk to different guys and give them a real chance to impress him.
Yeah, that all makes sense. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about the offense. Immediately when Antonio Pierce was announced as the head coach, maybe the next day, Jimmy Garoppolo was benched for Aiden O'Connell, 4th-round rookie who had a pretty good preseason in my mind, had a pretty good college resume at Purdue. Doesn't, necessarily look the part at quarterback. That's fine. But, going from Jimmy to Aiden feels like there's a kind of a face shift there that you kind of have to deal with. But I don't know that they're, from a prototype perspective, I don't know that they're all that different in playing styles. I mean, they're passers that rely more on anticipation than anything else. Garoppolo obviously is better in terms of athleticism, but doesn't really use it. They don't push the ball downfield that much. Maybe I'm reading Aiden O'Connell wrong. I'm still thinking about the pre-draft scouting report. But it feels like the offense doesn't necessarily change all that much with Jimmy in there, so why go with the rookie?
Well, I think Garoppolo was turning the ball over a lot. He was putting the ball in harm's way, throwing hospital balls, and he was very unwilling to throw the ball deep. And when he did, he just didn't throw very accurately. I mean, I think everybody remembers the Lions game where he missed a wide open Davante Adams twice for plus 50-yard potential touchdowns. So I think O'Connell does provide better deep ball accuracy and more willingness to throw the ball downfield. It's been kind of tough for O'Connell because he's played 3 elite pass defenses. He played the Jets, he played the Miami Dolphins with Jalen Ramsey, and he played the Kansas City Chiefs. So his numbers might not look great, but I'm curious to see how he does play against. The Vikings also have a top tier defense. Yeah, but I wouldn't put it in the the tier with the Jets and Dolphins and Chiefs quite yet. I think Brian Flores is great, and we'll talk a little bit more about what he does. But I wouldn't say this is an elite defense, but it's right there too. So it is a little bit of a drop off, but not much of a drop off as far as quality. So O'Connell just has not he hasn't had a break. He's seen good defense after good defense. He's going to see another one this week. But I think he does provide a little bit more aggression than Garoppolo, and he's not turning the ball over at the rate Garoppolo was.
Okay, yeah, that all makes sense. The players that he's throwing to, I mean, obviously it's been kind of up and down with Davante Adams. I think he was really excited when he came to Las Vegas to work with his college teammate Derek Carr. Obviously, he's gone through a couple of quarterbacks since then. Jacoby Myers, who I think probably signed because of familiarity with Josh McDaniels. I guess I don't know that for a fact, but one kind of assumes. Hunter Renfrow, who after I think the first couple of years at the Raiders, just people haven't really talked about him that much, but kind of an interesting slot threat. And then you've got a couple of younger guys that I'm not super familiar with. Plus, the pass catchers at tight end, Michael Mayer, the rookie, Austin Hooper, the veteran, Jesper Horsted, who I remember on Kansas City, but nowhere else. What do you make of this receiving core? Because it feels like, if I say Davante Adams and Jacoby Myers, like 2020 Arif is like, hey, that's a pretty good group, but like it feels like it's not that great.
Yeah, I mean, I think Davante Adams is still one of the top receivers in the league. They've had trouble getting him the ball because teams are so hyper focused on doubling him or rolling coverage his way, and they just haven't been able to get defense to shift away from him. And it's a balance. I mean, one of the more difficult things with having an alpha type of receiver is learning how to balance out when to force feed him the ball and when to go away from him. Like, you don't want to go away from him for too long, but at the same time, if you're forcing it to double coverage too much, then you're not doing any favors to your offense. And for a young quarterback, it'd be difficult because you're not just going against cover 2, cover 3, cover 4. You're going against these kind of like tailored coverages that you have to learn how to beat. So O'Connell's been kind of going through that. I think he's starting to find a nice balance as far as balancing when to go to Adams and when to go away from him. Myers is a really good number 2 receiver. He, really good route runner, does a lot of the dirty work inside as far as run blocking. Hunter Renfrow had an amazing year 2 years ago when he was basically the only receiver the Raiders had, and they had to just keep throwing to him. But then he kind of disappeared under Josh McDaniels, and I don't know what happened behind the scenes between those two, but it seemed like there was something there because it was so weird how he just completely disappeared from the offense, especially when the offense was struggling at times. So he's starting to get more targets now with McDaniels gone. And as far as another young target that the Vikings might have to watch out for is second-round tight end Michael Mayer, who, it's tough. I think when you look at guys like Dalton Kincaid and Sam Laporta, they kind of skew the expectations for rookie tight end a little bit, but rookie tight ends typically struggle. And I think Michael Mayer is kind of going through that where, he has up and down. Sometimes he has a few good games and then he might have one catch the next day. But I think this might be a game where Mayer will be used a little bit more.
Okay, yeah. Well, let's talk about that, like why Mayer might be used more and kind of what the Vikings defense presents. So now there's been a couple of pieces written about the Vikings defense. There's a really good one by Cody Alexander at Match Quarters that just got published today. Yesterday, Kevin Seifert published something about the Vikings defense, about the way that it grabbed from Narduzzi at Pitt. Over at the Wide Left Substack, Luke Braun wrote a little bit breaking it down. But the broad strokes are that it's a zone defense behind what we would call a blitz-heavy scheme, which not all NFL coaches would necessarily call it that because there's 6-7 players at the line of scrimmage and they rush the passer. The Vikings lead the league in fronts where 6 people rush the passer. They also lead the league in fronts where 3 people rush the passer and they drop 8. Primarily, it seems to be a pretty confusing defense for opposing quarterbacks, especially younger quarterbacks like Aiden O'Connell. How exactly do you kind of anticipate the Raiders deal with this? Because a lot of teams seem to get rid of the ball super quickly. They throw a lot of screens. The Vikings are good at defending screens, but it feels like there's some opportunities deep or over the middle.
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways to deal. Well, I wouldn't say just 2 ways, but 2 main ways to deal with it as far as in a drop back game is you either pass short and you have to be patient. Your receivers better be willing to take some hits because they play off, but then they're so ready to trigger on these short passes that when you're throwing a hitch or a slant, your receiver's getting hit pretty hard, which is why, the classic blitz beaters are tough to run against the Vikings and, or you go deep. And the problem with that is, you're going to have to take some time to go deep. So, and they're sending 6 guys at you. And not all quarterbacks are willing to stand back there and take a big hit and throw deep. The Eagles did it a couple times with Devontae Smith. So I think the Raiders have receivers that can make those tough catches underneath, and they're willing to be patient and take those 5-6 yard gains over and over again. I think that's the main way they're going to be able to move the ball on the Vikings and take some deep shots occasionally. I think O'Connell doesn't get rattled by pressure very easily, and Josh Jacobs is I think he's one of the better blitz pickup running backs in the league. But I think mainly it's going to have to be underneath passes, and the Vikings are very prepared for underneath passes, but I think they have enough tough receivers and good route runners underneath where they can use that as a reliable way to move the ball, and they will have to eventually chuck some deep. And I think they have Devontae Adams is going to be able to catch some deep.
So you mentioned Josh Jacobs. We didn't talk about the running backs yet. He was in the middle of the running back conversation that was happening this offseason. Saquon Barkley was part of it. Austin Eckler was part of it. They all eventually signed, obviously, but, various levels of satisfaction with the deals that they've signed. Do you think the Raiders are happy with the deal that they have with Josh Jacobs? Is Josh Jacobs happy with the deal he signed with the Raiders? And what is his role in the offense?
I don't think that Josh Jacobs is perfectly happy. I mean, I think he wanted I think he probably wanted a few more millions than he ended up getting. I think the Raiders are pretty happy with it. I mean, they get to keep one of the best running backs in the league for another year, and there's such a drop off between Josh Jacobs and Zamir White. It's not even close. I mean, a lot of teams have 2 backs that are kind of comparable, like, the Vikings have Madison and Chandler. But Josh Jacobs is so clearly the best back on this league and on his team. And he makes such a difference when he runs, just because he's able to lower his head and get those tough yardage. And that's been kind of his role this year. Like the offensive line hasn't been as good as they were last year. They're seeing a lot more 8-man boxes. Last year, they led the league in rushes into too high light boxes. This year, it's the opposite. That teams just don't respect their ability to go deep, and it's really affected the run game. But Josh Jacobs, to his credit, he just keeps running into those piles, moving the pile, and then once in a while, he's able to get a big run. And they've been kind of game-changing runs when he's been able to hit those.
Yeah, I believe he led the league in rushing last year, but he didn't even hit my radar until it was the overtime run against the Seahawks, right? And then I think it was just, for me, I was just like, oh, he's having a pretty good year, actually. Like that's not bad. But it took me a while for me to realize that he was like the league leader in rushing and having that kind of year. Does it feel like that's been kind of the case for Jacobs? Because I know he started off kind of slow as a rookie, if I remember correctly.
No, he actually started off pretty strong. I think in the beginning of his career, he did have a couple of injuries and missed a few games. But he started pretty strong. But then he did have a couple of down years where the Raiders just couldn't run block, and he was getting hit in the backfield a ton. And that's kind of been what's happening this year.
So you mentioned Zamir White. They also have Brandon Bolden on the roster. They have former Viking Amir Abdullah on the roster. But it is a Josh Jacobs-centric running game. What role do any of these three guys play, or are some of them just inactive every week? What's going on?
Zamir White might get a carry or two when Josh Jacobs needs a break, but they're really not trying to hand the ball off to anyone else. Amir Abdullah gets used in the passing game at times as well, but Josh Jacobs also is a pretty good receiver. Like I mentioned, he's one of the best blitz pickup running backs in the league. So he's on the field a ton. These other guys don't get used that much. Abdullah a little bit in hyper-specific situations, and White only when Jacobs needs a break for a few snaps, but this is a Josh Jacobs backfield.
Feels like that's like the ethos of the Raiders, right? Josh Jacobs has a bunch of snaps. Max Crosby has a bunch of snaps. Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers kind of dominate the snap count. Feels like there's not a lot of rotation kind of generally with the Raiders. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, they're top heavy. Like they have their star guys, and then they just don't have a lot of depth throughout the roster. So, yeah. A receiver that we didn't mention was Trey Tucker, their second round draft pick who ran a 4.3, I believe. He's a really fast slot receiver that they've been integrating in the offense, and he's had a few big plays, but he's had some rookie moments as well. And after a bye week, I'm curious to see how much his usage does increase.
Yeah, no, I remember he had a big play was against the Giants and against the Patriots, where it just felt like, they drafted that guy. I remember that guy. It's kind of cool. But it seems like which is kind of the case with the Vikings and Jordan Addison, to be honest, is that early on just showed up occasionally. He wasn't leading the team in snaps behind Justin Jefferson. That was KJ Osborne. And then he just kept on making big plays, and they kept on integrating him more and more into the offense. But I think one element that we've kind of danced around a little bit is this offensive line, right? So the Vikings are going to blitz a lot. That's going to put some stress on the pass protection. That's going to, change things. You mentioned that Aiden O'Connell's been good under pressure, but obviously every quarterback is going to be worse under pressure than they are in a clean pocket. The offensive line is going to play a big role in that. And you've also mentioned that the run blocking hasn't exactly been there for Josh Jacobs this year. I know Colton Miller is on the injury report. He didn't practice yesterday. I don't know where he is today. But that sounds like, my read is that he's like the good offensive lineman. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe like Andre James is better than I expect, or Dylan Parham has improved since last year, but that's kind of my read. How do you feel about this whole group, like Jermaine Illuminor, Greg Van Roten, Andre James, Dylan Parham, Colton Miller? What are the feelings on this group?
Yeah, I think they outplayed their talent level last year. As far as some of the pressure numbers and run blocking, they try to come in this year with the same group, and it just hasn't been the same. And you're right. Colton Miller is the only legitimate offensive lineman in this group. The left guard, Dylan Parham, he should be a center. I think he would be a really good center, but he's an okay guard right now. He's kind of undersized, and he's susceptible to getting bull rushed. Andre James is probably going to be gone next year. He'll probably be a good backup center somewhere else, but he's just not that good of a center. Greg Van Roten's actually been pretty good. I think PFF overrated him with his grade early on. They were rating him as like a top 5 guard for like 4 or 5 weeks early in the season.
Top 5? Goodness.
Yeah,
man, like fans would have loved that out of him. Goodness.
He might have been the first or second rated guard for like a few weeks. Like I don't know how when I watched him. I mean, he makes his block, but he's also getting like pushed, like 20 yards down, into the backfield. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it. But he has played better in the last few weeks. And the right tackle situation's kind of fluid. Jermaine Illuminor is starter, but Thayer Munford who's a second-year tackle, has kind of rotated in there. Munford's like he's a really good run blocker, but his pass blocking isn't that great. And Illuminor is kind of the opposite, where he's a better pass blocker than the run blocker. So we'll see who ends up starting at right tackle. I wouldn't be surprised if they went with a younger guy and had Munford in there, but I don't know if they have a solidified right tackle coming into this game.
Did the pick of like Alex Leatherwood just kind of screw up the right side of the line for like a long time? Are they still recovering from that, or should we just kind of move on? Is that like no longer something we care about?
I think it did. I mean, they were counting on him to be their tackle. They didn't sign anybody last year to replace him. And then Illuminor, luckily, is a guy who can kind of just bounce around different positions. And, he's been a pretty above average starter at right tackle. But yeah, drafting Alex Leatherwood over Darisaw has seriously hurt this franchise.
Yeah. So you've got Illuminor or Munford, probably Illuminor for the majority of the snaps, most likely up against Danielle Hunter. Now, the Vikings, obviously, they move some guys around, and, there's like stunts and twists and stuff like that, but primarily it'll be up against Danielle Hunter. Does that feel like an issue to you? Or, Hunter's pressures tend to arrive late. Obviously, he's had a sack streak going on for a little bit, but, the Vikings don't get a ton of pressure. They force quarterbacks to throw early, but there's not like really pressure in the same way that you get from a lot of 4-man fronts like with the Jets.
Yeah, I mean, when you blitz as much as you do, you're going to have quarterbacks getting rid of the ball, and you might get the free rushers here and there, but you're not going to get those classic pressures where a quarterback holds onto the ball for a hitch or two and a defensive end beats tackle. But I mean, Hunter's phenomenal, but I think O'Connell doesn't hold onto the ball that naturally that long anyways. He kind of did in the first couple of games where I think the game was kind of moving a little too fast for him. But I think he's a guy who's going to want to get rid of the ball. So I don't see pressure as too big of a deal in this game until they get into some third downs. And like you said, like if you're going to blitz, he's going to have to get rid of the ball anyways.
So I know that the Vikings have an unusual amount of their sacks come on 3-person rushes. Obviously, those are primarily coverage sacks because you're dropping 8. Because the Vikings drop 8 in those situations, sometimes even on third down, it tends to kind of confuse the read for quarterbacks. O'Connell's a rookie, and I don't know how many drop 8 coverages he's seen in his life. Certainly not a ton in the Big Ten, if I remember correctly. So how do you kind of anticipate those situations as they develop for him?
That's one of the more difficult things about facing the Vikings, especially this year, because Flores just, I think he used to be sort of, I don't know what one-dimensional is the right word for it, but you knew what you're going to get from him.
Yeah.
But this year he's just added he just added so much to his arsenal that it's very difficult to predict what he's going to do from down to down. And for a quarterback, I mean, you could imagine like you have 7 guys at the line of scrimmage. You're thinking, all right, pressure, I have to get rid of the ball. You're kind of speeding up your mental clock before the snap even starts, and then you snap the ball, and then all of a sudden they drop everyone back, and you only have 3 rushing, and then you have to kind of switch your mentality to, all right, I don't have to speed up my clock now. I should wait around and take my time because it's a 3-man rush, and it's difficult to make that switch even for veteran quarterbacks. So I think for a young quarterback like O'Connell, I think he's pretty poised for a rookie, but that's going to be one of the challenges is just being able to constantly switch your clock in your head and your mentality as far as plays and your progressions when it comes to blitz versus drop 8.
Who handles the protections? Is that O'Connell? Is that Andre James? Is it one of the guards? How does that get kind of determined?
In this system, it's O'Connell. The quarterback has to handle everything pretty much at the line of scrimmage. So that's another reason why it's very difficult for a rookie. And I think it has been pretty impressive how well O'Connell's handled those responsibilities. So, but this week is going to be an even bigger challenge because you're facing such a kind of a novel defense that you don't see every week.
Yeah, normally I would ask hey, which member of the opposing defense worries you the most? And there's a couple on the Vikings where you could say, hey, it's, Hunter, like we mentioned, or it could be Harrison Smith, or hey, Josh Metellus is having a nutso season. But it just feels like that's not the story with the Vikings. How do you feel like the Raiders need to kind of focus in on a guy like Hunter, or do you just think hey, screw the small picture stuff this week. We got to pay a lot more attention to the big picture, where people are rushing from, kind of what the coverage on the back end looks like. What bothers you the most about kind of anticipating this defense?
Yeah, to me, it's not a one person thing. It's having to deal with that whole defense. I think this is a challenge for every team that faces the Vikings is that, everybody's kind of going to this Fangio too high odd front system, or they're kind of running the remnants of the Seattle cover 3 system, and then you just don't get a lot of practice against a team that does what the Vikings do. So that's the challenge, is being able to you don't have those answers for this Vikings defense in your playbook. You have to add these answers to your playbook, and it kind of helps that the Raiders did have a bye week to prepare for this defense. But I mean, it's pretty tough, if you have a short week or just a 1 week to prepare to go against this Vikings defense. So I would say it's more schematic. Obviously they have good players and you have to watch out for guys like, Hunter and Smith. But overall you're kind of focused on what can we do against this defense? What answers do we have against this defense? And it's even hard to double it or game plan a lot of answers for Danielle Hunter because you have to game plan for the pressures first.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's switch over to the other side of the ball because I've got a lot of questions. They drafted a bunch of players on this side of the ball. But despite the investments that they've made, they grabbed a couple of people in free agency. I don't think Marcus Epps will be available, but they signed him. They signed Jack Jones. Just a bunch of guys for the last 2 years of defense. I think Robert Spillane, but it really just feels like it's Max Crosby and then everybody else. Is there? We'll go position group by position group, but is there anybody else that you got to pay attention to, or is it just Nate Hobbs had a good year last year? Should I care about that? I don't know. Or is it just Max Crosby?
Yeah, I think Nate Hobbs is probably the second best defender on this team, but Max Crosby is by far the best defender. And he, when he's on the field, there's probably better examples throughout the league, but, obviously I have to watch every Raider game because I do a Raider podcast. But, man, he elevates this defense in a way you rarely see from one defender because it's such a team-orientated side of the ball, more so than offense, that you rarely see one guy just kind of carry up the rest of the guys. But Crosby is just that good. I mean, one stat that kind of speaks to that is running success rate. When you run to Crosby's side, the Raiders are 5th in success rate. When you run away from Crosby to the left, they're 32nd in success rate. So, yeah. And most people don't even talk about how good of a run defender Max Crosby is.
He leads the league, I think, in run stop win rate or something like that.
Yeah, I mean he's ridiculously good against run, and we know how good of a pass rusher he is. So yeah, I would think you have to try to stop Crosby. It's very difficult to do. And Nate Hobbs, I think he's an elite slot corner, and he's above average outside corner, but he's played outside. He played outside against the Chiefs, and he's done that before in his career when the Raiders needed him to. I think maybe that would be the case in this Vikings game again. But the Raiders do subscribe to that old Patriots philosophy of doubling the number one receiver and having so you double the number one receiver with your lesser corner, and then you have your top corner play one-on-one with the second receiver. So I think we're going to see a lot of doubles on Justin Jefferson, and we're going to see Addison with a lot of one-on-one with Nate Hobbs.
That'll be interesting. So I remember when the Raiders drafted Amik Robertson, who was he like 5'7"? I don't know. This guy's small.
It's like 5'8", yeah.
Yeah, and he played outside in college, but everyone's like, yeah, he's going to be a slot corner, and that just like didn't work out. Is he an outside corner? Like, what's going on?
He's mostly played outside, and he's been. I mean, he's pretty good coverage wise. He's tough corner, but at the end of the day, when you're 5'8", there's only so much you could do, and he has good ball skills. Like, he can make plays on the ball, but sometimes he just gets out muscled for footballs, or a guy jumps over him. It just happens when you're 5'8". I mean, if he was 2 to 3 inches taller, he'd probably be a Pro Bowl or maybe all pro type of corner, but he's 5'8", and there's only so much you could do when you don't have the length and height to match up against some of these taller receivers.
Yeah, I mean, Jack Jones is like 5'11", right? And so there's not, and he's like 175 pounds or whatever, right? Like, he's not a huge guy. So it doesn't seem like there is that guy. Maybe that's one reason they drafted Jacorian Bennett, but like, how much time has, and Jacorian Bennett was like the other corner that Maryland had, and they both like tested through the roof. How much play has Jacorian Bennett gotten, and has it created like matchup problems to have like, it's like Nate Hobbs and Amik Robertson and Jack Jones?
Yeah, I think coming into the season, the Raiders were very excited about Jacorian Bennett. He was a starter. Then he dealt with some injuries and some up and down play. So he's been kind of in and out of the rotation. I don't know what the plan is going to be coming out of this bye week. Typically after a bye week, that's when teams will typically start integrating younger players into the lineup more, and they just cut Marcus Peters, who was a starter too. So I'm curious to see what they do at corner. I think there is a chance that Jacorian Bennett might be a starter. Obviously, they traded for Jack Jones, who they like, but I don't know. I think Jacorian Bennett is a super athletic corner that had some flashes, but he definitely has a lot of work to do as far as his technique and processing as well. So I really don't. They have a lot of options, but there's nothing set yet as far as starting lineup. So I couldn't tell you who's going to be the starting corners this week.
And then behind them, you've got Trevon Moehrig. You've got, I think, because Marcus Epps, there's that injury. You've got like Chris Smith, who they just drafted, Isaiah Pola-Mao, who was like an undrafted free agent, I think, like last year, not this year. What is the plan at safety if Marcus Epps can't go? And what is your sense on whether or not Marcus Epps is going to be available?
Yeah, I don't know if he's going to be available, but I think Isaiah Pola-Mao showed a lot of promise when Epps went down. So he's really good against pass, very instinctual, has a lot of range. So this might be Marcus Epps is really good in run defense, obviously, but against the Vikings passing attack, I think it would be a good game for Pola-Mao, even if Epps is healthy. And when Epps is healthy, they've done some 3 safety lineups with Pola-Mao in there too. Trevon Moehrig, I think he's really kind of taken off this year, and he's having a career year. He's a former second-round pick who kind of a down year last year after a promising rookie year. So he's a good matchup player, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Moehrig matched up on TJ Hawkinson.
Okay, yeah, and when you take a look, obviously Justin Jefferson, you're worried about. TJ Hawkinson leads the league among tight ends in targets. Some of that's because Jefferson was gone, of course. Jordan Addison is a big play threat. It's a pretty good receiving group. Obviously, if Addison was a little bit more consistent or if KJ Osborne was more consistent, this would be like an extremely high level receiving group, but it has a ton of threats. You take a look at this without taking into account the front or the linebackers. What are your feelings on the way that secondary matches up to that receiving group?
Yeah, I think the Vikings are pretty top heavy as well. I mean, obviously you have Justin Jefferson and you have Addison. I just never been a big Osborne guy. I don't know how you feel about him. I've never seen Osborne as that good of a receiver. I think he's useful at times, but obviously I think Addison is the guy you have to watch out for and might give this secondary a lot of trouble. Obviously, Justin Jefferson is who he is, and I think they're going to try to double him a lot, and he's going to still make his plays. But I think the matchup to watch out for is going to be Addison on whoever they put on him. It might be Nate Hobbs. It might be Jack Jones, but he's going to get a lot of one-on-one coverage. And I think that's going to be whoever wins that matchup consistently is going to be a big factor in this game.
And you mentioned you get the Patriot-style defense. Patrick Graham is their defensive coordinator. Do you often see a ton of man coverage in this? Because in the modern NFL, while I wouldn't say that that's unique or novel in the way that like the Flores defense is, that is like a lot different than the cover sixes that we're seeing under the Vic Fangio stuff, the cover threes that we're seeing that are kind of remnants of the Seattle stuff. I mean, if it's man coverage, I mean, that's not new, but it's different, right? Is that what's happening?
No, they don't play a ton of man coverage. They're actually pretty balanced as far as what they do. They do a little bit of everything. The philosophy is to stop explosive plays. So they play a lot of two deep coverages, cover 4, cover 6. So they're trying to stop explosive plays. They sit back in coverage, but there are situations where you have to man up, and I think that's where we're going to see that matchup come into play. And I wouldn't be surprised if they played a little bit more man in this game against the Vikings, just to kind of force Josh Dobbs to kind of hit some tight windows and try to take Jefferson away with bracket coverage.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about linebackers, because I do want to talk about like the Josh Dobbs matchup, but I think that once we get to kind of the defensive line versus the offensive line, then we can talk about Dobbs. But the linebacker group, I mean, you've got a converted safety in Divine Diablo, which, I mean, I think a lot of people coming out of that draft saw him as a linebacker, but he was, I believe, a safety in college. Robert Spillane, who they got from Pitt. Not like an amazing linebacker group, in my opinion. I mean, I like Diablo, but like not an amazing group, but not an awful group either, right? What do you take away from this linebacker group? Is it because to me, Spillane's a very downhill guy. Diablo's a very like box coverage is pretty good. What do you think of that? Is it like a balanced group? How do you kind of evaluate this linebacker group?
I think it's a surprisingly good group. I mean, Spillane is playing. I was very down on him when the Raiders signed him, talking to some Pittsburgh guys. Even they weren't that. I mean, they loved the character and all that, but they just weren't very impressed with him on the field. But he's played pretty damn good this year. He's been one of the Raiders' better defenders. And even in coverage, he's been pretty good as far as being a zone defender and reading quarterbacks' eyes. You don't want him playing man-to-man on anybody, but Spillane's been one of the good surprises for the Raiders this year. Divine Diablo has been up and down. His flash plays are great. I mean, he's explosive. You see the side-to-side speed, but sometimes he's a beat slow on his reads. But yeah, he could be a pretty good coverage player as well. So I think the Raiders linebackers are good. I don't think they're elite or anything, but this is probably one of the better linebacker cores that they've had probably the last 10 years, but that's not saying that much because their linebackers have been pretty terrible.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I mean, speaking of terrible, let's talk about Tyree Wilson. Sorry.
Wow.
Okay, so my understanding, my good friend Trevor Sickham over at PFF was like, hey, it's like week 3 and Tyree Wilson has not won a single pass rush rep yet, which I've never heard in my life. That's crazy to me. So my understanding is that he hadn't won like a pass rush win. He hadn't had a single pass rush win until like week 4. And it sounds like he's getting better, but that doesn't like mean anything because he was going from like nothing to to maybe nothing, right? What's the deal? Why is he bad? He's a high first round pick.
Well, he's a first round pick that everybody knew would be a project. He was very productive, even though his get off was really bad. His technique was bad in college, but he was productive because he was just a athletic monster, 6'7", explosive, powerful guy. But the problem was his get off is so inconsistent, and it wasn't an explosion thing. It was just like he couldn't anticipate the snap count. Yeah.
And so in college he anticipated, and in the NFL it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't anticipating it well in college either. I mean, he was late off the snap, but he was just so powerful and fast that he would still win. But you can't do that in NFL. And another problem was he had a foot injury that he wasn't able to practice in training camp at all until the last preseason game. So he had no training camp. He had a lot he needed to work on as far as his technique. His get off was bad. His hands technique was bad. So he really needed to work on these things. And he was basically having his training camp in real game time. So it was just a bad snowball effect for him in the beginning. And he's played a little bit better. I mean, but as far as his developmental stage, he's like at the very beginning. So, it is, but it's still the lack of pressure and the lack of wins is concerning. But when you look at, where he is in his development, it's just in the really early stages. And really, you wouldn't want him to be getting as many snaps as he is now, but he's kind of forced into it with the whole Chandler Jones situation.
So you say he's like early in his development, and that's like fair. He was supposed to be a developmental guy when he was drafted, but like he's got kind of old, right? Like when he was drafted, like he was like a 5th-year senior or something like that. It was like 24, I think, when he was drafted. Like, this is kind of old for a developmental guy, right? Are there any concerns about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a concern. And it's concerning that he's not at least getting more wins just off of pure athleticism, which you would like to see. So those are definitely concerns. But, I think with the injury and how far behind he is from a technical perspective, I think it's okay to give him a mulligan this year. But we'll see where he is next year. But the age is concerning, and how far behind he is concerning. But one thing he does do pretty well is he beats up tight ends pretty well. So that's starting to show up on film, where if you put a tight end on him, he's going to kill him. And that's at least one thing he does well.
You got to be able to do that. So that's good. So the other edge rushers aside from Crosby are like Malcolm Kuntz, Malik Reed, former Viking, Janarius Robinson. What's the deal? Do we see them a ton? Do we see them not that much? How good are they at complementing that pass rush? Like, what are your thoughts on that group?
So Malcolm Kuntz is another pass rusher that's kind of come on as late. He's pretty good. He's a smaller edge rusher, but he's been getting his pressure numbers have been better in the last few weeks. Interior wise, John Jenkins, and Jerry Tillery they're all right, but they get pressure here and there. But it's just not a lot of guys to get excited about other than Max Crosby.
Did they draft the wrong Byron Young?
They did. They definitely did. But they were looking for an interior guy, and one the Rams have is on the edge. But that's actually get talked about a lot around here. But
of course.
Yeah.
Okay, well let's talk a little bit about Max Crosby, because he's a guy that like he doesn't miss snaps. He's like 98% of snaps every year, but he got injured enough. Like, obviously, he gets like injured every year. You play that often, you play that hard, you're going to get injured, but he plays through them, right? He got injured enough this year that he had to get taken off the field, and like, horror of horrors, he ends up playing like 80% of snaps or something like that. Are we going to see him a little bit less, or does the bye week help, or what's kind of the deal with how often we're going to see Max Crosby, and whether or not his injury even impacts his effectiveness?
Well, so the crazy thing is, before the Chiefs game, he had a life-threatening infection in his knee, and he couldn't even walk, which is why he was listed as doubtful. And up until our Sean Reed wrote a great story about this, so you check out The Athletic if you want. But he needed a blood test to show that he didn't have an infection twice in a row for him to actually play. So they didn't know he could play in this Chiefs game until they showed that he had no infection in his knee, but it was swelling up. He was in the hospital. He couldn't walk, and eventually he was able to practice a little bit. But it's one of the more insane stories as far as players being able to play a game after being listed as doubtful. I think he might be the first player to actually play after being listed as doubtful for at least this year. So I mean, that kind of just shows you how insane Crosby is and how much he loves this game. Like you can already tell that by how many snaps he's playing. But for him to play in the Chiefs game was crazy. But the infection is gone now. So I wouldn't be I think he's going to be back up to 97, 98% snaps in this game against the Vikings. I don't think anything's going to slow him down.
Once the Vikings listed Brett Favre as out, and he played in the game, so anything is possible. I think it was against the Bears, and the Bears got, I think rightfully, like really mad about that. Like lodged complaint to the league, and the league was like, these are all estimations. Who's to say? But but yeah, I think Crosby's the only guy listed doubtful this year that ended up playing. That is pretty nuts though. And also, I think like I don't know if that's in Tashawn Reed's that story that you're mentioning or a different Tashawn Reed story, but he mentioned that that like football saved his life. He had I think it was an alcohol addiction or something like that, and football was kind of one of the things that pulled him out. So that might be a reason that he plays so many snaps is because kind of the game gave so much to him, so he wants to give back to the game or something along those lines. But he's an incredible story. But yeah, I mean, it just feels like this is not a defense that tends to inspire a ton of fear outside of Max Crosby. But the Vikings are rolling in with a backup quarterback's coming off of two bad games that they, bad enough, they kind of had an open conversation immediately after the Bears game where they were like, we don't know who our starting quarterback's going to be in 2 weeks against the Raiders. We'll figure it out after the bye, and it turns out it's still Joshua Dobbs, but they could have rolled with Nick Mullins, former Raider, or Jaren Hall, a rookie, and they ended up sticking with Dobbs. I imagine you've watched a fair amount of Dobbs because he's an interesting story. You're an X's and O's guy. Everybody who breaks down quarterbacks and X's and O's has had like one little film session on Joshua Dobbs. So kind of give me your take on this guy and how he and the nature of the Vikings offense in general matches up with the way that this defense operates and the amount of talent that the Raiders can bring to bear on defense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Vikings mismanaged Dobbs because the more he knows his teammates, the worse he gets. So I think they should have kept him in Arizona. Yeah, kept him in Arizona and then fly him into game days on game days. But no, I think he's an aggressive passer. So I think that's the main trait that serves him well in this offense is he wants to throw downfield and he's not just looking to get to the checkdowns. So he's always looking downfield and letting that route develop. And obviously with Justin Jefferson coming back, that's going to be a good trait to have. I just think his aggression is good. And then when those passes aren't there, obviously he could take off, and that's an added element he has that this offense hasn't really had.
When you look at kind of the ways that he wins and the ways that he loses, right? Like it seems like timing oriented stuff is not great for him, but improvisational stuff is. How good the Raiders are dealing at stuff like scramble drills or running threats at quarterback. I mean, I know they see it a lot with like Patrick Mahomes in the division and now Russell Wilson, but it feels like, this is like a unique issue heading into the game that you wouldn't have had to deal with if it was Nick Mullins or obviously if Kirk Cousins was healthy.
Yeah, I think they're actually pretty good with dealing with running quarterbacks. I mean, that game against you only can do so much against Patrick Mahomes, but I think they're pretty disciplined in their rush lanes and coverage wise. Like I said, their philosophy is to kind of limit explosive plays, so they kind of sit back there anyways, and you're not going to get a ton of explosives by running around and trying to chuck one deep. So they are going to force Dobbs to try to play underneath a little bit more than he might be used to. They're not great in a lot of metrics, but they're fifth in limiting explosive pass plays.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Anything about the special teams unit that's worth paying attention to? Obviously, they have Daniel Carlson, who immediately after the Vikings let him go, turned into one of the best kickers in the league. Feels like he's not at that level right now, but it feels like he's not bad, right? So is AJ Cole, doing all right? How's the return game? What do you think?
Yeah, AJ Cole is one of the better punters in the league. He had a record day like a couple weeks ago. Daniel Carlson was arguably a top 3 kicker in the league for a couple of years, and he's had some struggles recently, kind of missing easy field goals that he doesn't typically miss in the last few weeks. So that's something to watch out for to see if he could kind of get himself back on track. Special teams wise, returns. I don't remember. I don't really remember them having that many memorable returns. AJ Cole, one of the better punters in the league, so field position. Raiders typically get pretty good defensive field position, and we'll see if Carlson could get back on track.
Sure. I believe the Vikings are favored. Let me double check that super quick. Oh, I totally forgot ESPN is like a betting vertical now. The Vikings are favored by 3. Looks like the over-under is at 40.5. Do you think it's fair that the Vikings are favored? Who do you take? What's your prediction for the game?
Yeah, I think it's fair that the Vikings are favored. I kind of think, I kind of think the Raiders can't pull this off because they are coming off a bye week. And I think a big advantage that the Vikings have is that it's just tough to prepare for that defense with not much time. So with some extra added time, they could have some more answers for that Brian Flores defense. And I don't think they're going to score 30 on them or anything, but I think they might be able to score 24 if Aidan O'Connell executes. And I think defensively, just taking away the explosives and making Dobbs be methodical could be a good answer. So I think it's going to be pretty close. I mean, on the State of Nation pod, our Raiders podcast, I predicted 24-23. I think it's going to be a close game.
Oh, wow.
It's a coin flip, but just being at home, I think the Raiders might be able to pull it off.
Oh, predicting a missed extra point from the Vikings, that makes sense.
Or field goals, a bunch of field goals.
Yeah, a bunch of field goals. Cool, man. If there's anything else you want to add, something I skipped over that you wanted to talk about, now's a good time. Otherwise, plug yourself.
I think we covered everything. I just wrote an article about the Niners offense on The Athletic, and you could check out our podcast, State of the Nation, if you want to hear a little bit more from the Raiders side. But that's pretty much it.
Cool. Thanks so much for coming on, man.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
All right, we're back, and before we get into the mailbag, the big piece of national news that came out today as far as the NFL was concerned involved Sean McDermott and a motivational speech, I guess you could say, that had been given a little while ago. And I just want to point out, before we start this discussion, any jokes or humor that is being that's expressed during this is absolutely not being expressed toward anyone who was a victim, suffered, whatever, as a result of 9/11, whether it be worker or whether it be somebody like innocent bystander, whatever. We are purely looking at Sean McDermott as a leader at this point for a coach. Everything is pointed in his direction. Arif, can you tell us why Sean McDermott was trying to refer to 9/11 as a team sport?
All right, so in 2019...
And who reported it? Let's start with that.
Right, so Tyler Dunn over at Go Long TD basically specializes in long-form articles. I believe he's working with Bob McGinn right now, so if you like all of those anonymous scout stories, that's over at Go Long TD as well. But Tyler Dunn has been there for a while. Before that, he was at Bleacher Report. I think a lot of Vikings fans became familiar with his work after a bunch of stuff about Mike Zimmer came out right before Mike Zimmer was fired. If you're hearing a bunch of stories about how Mike Zimmer lost the locker room, and like stories like Adam Thielen saying like, I enjoy coming to work now. That a lot of that comes from Tyler Dunn, who has done a bunch of deep dives. Some of the stuff, I think, I'm not a huge, and I've talked to him about this, so it's not like I'm like just throwing shade, whatever. But like, sometimes he writes pieces that I think are puff pieces, like the Cincinnati Bengals piece, "No one believes in us" type piece. I was like, whatever. But the deep dives that are like critical are like really interesting because they tell a lot of really fascinating stories. So one of those is about Sean McDermott, head coach of the Buffalo Bills. And there's a ton of stories in there about McDermott, both positive and negative as a head coach. But as you can imagine, the direction of the piece kind of heads negative. And the story that caught fire today is a story. It's a bunch of original reporting. Apparently, people covering the Bills or people very familiar with the Bills were aware of this, but didn't have, the resources they needed necessarily to report on it. Maybe they only had, one source or something like that. But in 2019, I believe this is at training camp. At training camp, McDermott, every day there's like a morning address to the team. This morning, he wanted to come up with something that would motivate the team, right? It was a motivational speech. And so he told them that they needed to come together, right? Maybe had a couple of bad practices. The team wasn't working entirely in unison. Who knows? And he used an interesting event, right, to focus on that one. Not necessarily.
One. You don't go to that well often, unless you need it. Apparently,
I will say going to this event is not necessarily awful if you do it the right way. The event was 9/11. It was the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, something we have talked about quite a bit on this show for some reason.
Mainly referring to Pete Carroll and his loose change questions.
And Aaron Rodgers and his loose change questions.
Yes.
And also the origin story of Tom Brady. Yes. No loose change questions as far as I can tell of that one. But he wanted the team to come together. There's a lot of stories about people coming together surrounding 9/11. A ton of them. The heroes on Flight 93. Absolutely a story. I don't know if I'd relate that to a football team about something as trivial as football, but coaches do this all the time where they relate something like, apocalyptic to football, right? There's a bunch of war metaphors already. So you could do that. You could talk about how the firefighters and police members and EMT responders came together after the towers were hit, right? Very inspiring stuff. You could talk about how the United States or New Yorkers or, I don't know, the world came together after a show of solidarity after 9/11. Like there's a lot of coming together stories about this tragic event, right? Any of those stories would work. He didn't pick any of those stories. He instead picked the terrorists on 9/11. And I want to be clear, this is unambiguous. So when Tyler Dunn's reporting, he talked to 7 different sources. They call it the 9/11 speech. Like,
sorry, I cracked. I thought I was going to make it through. I couldn't.
No, you weren't. This story is crazy. So, and it's very clear he is talking about the terrorists and not, the people fighting the terrorists, the people who were victims of terrorists, the people trying to rebuild after the terrorism had occurred. He was talking about the terrorists. For example, he asked the players in the room questions. What tactics do you think they used to come together? And what do you think their biggest obstacle was? And it was very clear that the players picked up on who he was talking about because somebody responded to that biggest obstacles question with the TSA, which is amazing. Also, technically not true. I'm going to give it a pass. The TSA wasn't founded until 2 months after 9/11. It's a response to 9/11. I don't care. That response is very funny.
Yes.
But which great. So that's the snippet, right? That got tweeted out, right? That paragraph where he talks about the unity that the terrorists had in coming together. On paper, that is technically an example of people coming together to overcome some pretty big obstacles, to against all odds to change the world. That's all technically true on paper. But you don't, under any circumstances, got to hand it to him. Bill Maher found that out after 9/11 when he said that the terrorists had more courage than almost anyone watching the show, which as someone who very often insults his readers and listeners, there's some like lines that you don't really like cross in those insults, right? There's like banter. There's like, I can't believe our listeners, they're so stupid. They listen to this stupid show, because there's some self-deprecation in there, right? Like there's like, I look, our show is dumb and you listen to it. That makes you dumb. I'm part of the dumb, right? That works. This one is just like, hey, those terrorists, they had more moral fiber than you do. That's crazy. That's crazy. Technically, under most definitions of the word courage, one could make the argument that they did exhibit a lot of courage, an uncommon amount, right? But that you don't say that. There's no reason to do that, Sean. Yeah, they did come together. That doesn't work. The stories that came out of this are pretty great, because there's like it's 7 sources. They all gave kind of different interpretations. But I think my favorite one, and I strongly encourage people to read the story. It's $8 a month to get access to the Substack. So, it's not very expensive. But the stories that like stick out to me, and this is like 20,000 words, so I could share some stories and not give a ton of this stuff away. There's like a great one about a failed motivational speech he gave about Niagara Falls, right? That's in there. That's just crazy as well. But one veteran was like, I don't know why he's that awkward, but his social skills are lacking. That's one where maybe he heard it on a podcast. Next episode. That's not one to lead with. Which is great. I just love the next episode bit. Like, hey, you heard that on a podcast? That's great. Good for you. I'm sure there's another story somewhere in there if you dig deep enough.
It's the weirdest version. I had tweeted this out earlier, but it's the weirdest version of like game respects game I have ever heard.
Yeah, like, yeah, you gotta look. I wouldn't have done that. That's crazy. Much respect. No, you don't gotta respect that. That's crazy. You don't gotta do that. So another player was like, hey, that's like how some people say Hitler was a great leader. No reason to do that. Another was, in his brain, it probably was, if evil can accomplish this, then imagine what we can accomplish doing things the right way. But the message was just effed up, right? So like there's like a bunch of stories in there. He has interviews with like coaches in there as well, people who currently work with McDermott in Buffalo, people who formerly work with McDermott. It's a bunch of great stuff in there. What's interesting is like the Bills fan response some Bills fans were like, I was wondering when this story would leak, but like some fans were just like, I can't believe you can't trust Tyler Dunne. Who even is he? And then like Sean McDermott confirmed it in a presser today. He was like,
that's the best part. He confirmed it in a presser today and was like, look, I'm going to talk to the team after this, but yeah, I probably chose my words poorly.
He also said he was like misinterpreted, which like, we all know what you meant. Like I know you didn't intend to praise the terrorists who committed the greatest act of terrorism on American soil in history. Like, I know you didn't intend that. I know that you were telling a story about teamwork. No one is misinterpreting you. The problem is that we're interpreting you, right? Like you got to pick your battles, man. That's nuts. So yeah, they confirmed it. And then a bunch of Bills, like my favorite is this guy who's just like, I'm not saying that when I say you can't trust Tyler Dunne, I'm not saying the stories aren't true, which is like crazy to say. Like if you're making like this really like, maybe not complex or complicated point, but nuanced point about how media reporting on objective facts can still find ways to be biased, which is true. You can find ways to be biased by choosing which facts you report and framing those facts in a particular way. That's like a very famous example of about how media is always subjective. Sure. but it actually that's not what they were saying, and it just comes off as unhinged. Like there's one I saw that was just like, you could have waited to publish this for 2 more weeks, which I don't even know what the logic behind that is. But it's like, you're just trying to get him fired now, which would 2 weeks later have not gotten him fired? You're just assuming they win the next 2 games or something? Like, I have no idea what the logic behind that is, but okay.
Just trying to get them into the playoffs and then release the bomb?
And then release it. That seems worse, right? Like, as soon as they clinch, you drop the story. That's worse. How is that better? Like, we did it. We dropped to 500. It was a tough season. We overcame a lot of obstacles. We shot ourselves in the foot a lot. But we did it.
Real tough schedule. Real tough. Also 9/11.
Also 9/11. Like I don't think waiting until they clinch is better. Yeah. So yeah, it was a very weird response from a lot of Bills fans. Who ended up having to concede that the story was actually true. But there was one that was just like, hey, instead of giving $8 a month to this reporter who reported the news, give $8 to a 9/11 memorial. And one of our favorite guests ever on the show, Victoria Dirtbag Queer, she quote tweeted that with Bills fans have one move.
That's all they got.
It's all
they've got from the Andy Dalton thing. Like, it's all they've got.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just kind of a nuts thing. There's like a bunch of stuff in there. Obviously, the article's written in a particular way with a particular intent. And so I come away thinking that Sean McDermott is not a great head coach, but there's obviously a bunch of stuff in there. I highly recommend reading. It's a 3-part series. Like I said, 20,000 words, really deeply reported. So, head over there. Obviously, we'll throw it into the show notes and stuff like that. But yeah, a bunch of 9/11 jokes today.
Just remarkable. Absolute, like, you dig to you go to the well for motivational stuff. I realize, but
I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to do this anyway. There's one that had me dying. That was, the Wolverine meme when he's holding up the picture.
Yes.
It was from X-Men season 1 when like Mimic died. Anyway, I should not know that.
Morph. It was Morph.
Morph. That's Mimic. Right.
I corrected you. Oh, good
perfect.
Lord.
I feel better about this now. Actually,
God, this was a
you
trick.
Corrected me on nerd stuff. Okay, Morph was so obnoxious, though. I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. Not disagreeing.
But anyway, so Morph dies, and they're like reminiscing, and he holds up a photo, right? So a lot of people are familiar with this meme, but they replaced the picture of Morph, which is the nature of the meme, with Osama bin Laden. And the caption just Sean McDermott.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh my God. This is incredible. There's another one with Notre Dame where, because Notre Dame has this, like, as you enter the locker room, there's a play like a champion thing above it. And previously, the funniest thing I'd seen with the play like a champion thing was a bunch of priests hitting the sign as they walk into the locker room. That's amazing. But someone replaced the term champion with terrorist. Incredible memery. And again, this is just like, Sean, this is the thing that you seem to be conveying. This is not us saying like, hey, the tragedy of 9/11 is meaningless. No, it's us saying, Sean, this is what it looks like you're saying.
Yeah,
play like a terrorist today.
It's just absolutely remarkable. I'd been watching it all day, slowly start to break, and then when it hit the Schefter and the Ian Rappaport like feeds, the thing just explodes everywhere. And poor terminology considering what we're talking about, but not trying to. Yeah. So, but when it gets asked at the presser, he's like, "Yeah, all right, I was prepared for this today."
He had 4 years to come up with an answer to this question, and I was misinterpreted as probably not the way I would have gone about that after 4 years of prep. Just gonna throw that out there.
I just simply would not have gotten myself into this position, quite frankly.
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah, Khalid Sheikh
But
Mohammed
assuming you had.
Yeah, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is not someone that I would have tried to discuss with my football team, but I'm also not a professional head coach.
Yeah, well, That's why you don't have the guts to dig into the deepest motivational stories you could possibly find.
I'm just trying to imagine like him listening to a This American Life, and like that's the topic. Is, oh, you know what? Okay, maybe I can bring this up with the guys.
The guys,
The
they'll love this one.
the guys will be fine with this. All right, we need to be done with this particular topic because this is only going to get worse. Let's go to the mailbag.
The mailbag's not going to bring this up at all.
Famously, we're going to go to the mailbag where we're going to go back onto the rails.
Where they've never asked a 9/11 question.
A Hyundai for one of us is a Hyundai for all of us asks, is there any realistic chance we should expect Dobbs and the receivers to get on the same page during the stretch run? Conventional wisdom says time, but recent evidence seems to disagree.
The issue is less being on the same page with the receivers, although that is an issue, and more the timing of the offense, right? It's aligning your footwork with when you throw. It's anticipating when routes break, which is less a receiver-specific thing, although there are some elements of that at play, and more of this is what the offense is asking you to do thing. It took Kirk Cousins an entire year and 2 off seasons to get it right. And even the first couple of games of the season, he didn't really seem to have the timing down. Now, every quarterback is different. Kirk Cousins is like a creature of habit, like we know that. So it is a little bit different, but I just feel like 2 weeks is like not a ton of time to fix chemistry issues. I think actually what ends up happening is that you design an offense where the timing element is like less important. It's not to say it's never going to be important. There's going to be timing plays in there that are really reliant on your footwork aligning with anticipation and the throw and the break of the route and stuff like that. Like there's a pretty good video series of Bill Walsh teaching quarterbacking. I think it's still up on YouTube. But one of the things is as you get out of your last step of your drop back, which can be, 3 steps, 5 steps, 5 steps in a hitch, 5 steps and 2 hitches, 7 steps, whatever. As you get to the last step of your drop back, the way that they practice is that the receiver is breaking at the exact same time your foot hits the ground. And so you're beginning your throwing motion, right? And that is what modern quarterbacking has been. Maybe before that, but certainly since that. When you watch like Chase Daniel breakdown or Dan Orlovsky breakdown or JT O'Sullivan breakdown quarterback play, they'll very often talk about the way that footwork develops in concert with the route break and the drop back. And that's just not what was happening, is that the footwork wasn't aligning with the route depth and the route breaks. And so that was a bigger issue. And you can design plays that have, or you design an offense that has fewer plays that operate like that. Like play action, for example, is a pretty good example of a set of plays, especially when you're on the move, when you've got like a bootleg, where the timing is a little bit less important and your feel for space and where the receiver is going to be is a little bit more important. RPOs, obviously timing is like critical, but everyone is pretty familiar with what that timing is, as opposed to, for example, when he nearly threw that pick 6 to Jalen Johnson against the Bears, the timing was off because he took a hitch when he shouldn't have taken a hitch and he threw it late, or he should have taken a hitch when he shouldn't have, and or he didn't take a hitch when he should have and he threw it early. One of the two, right? But there was a hitch involved, and either he should or he shouldn't have taken it, and that was on an RPO. You get rid of the ball as soon as you pull the ball from the running back's stomach, right? And so everyone is familiar with what that timing looks like, because if you don't do it, you get an ineligible man downfield penalty. Like you just got to throw the ball right away. So like you could do an RPO where there's not any ambiguity about what your timing is. Read options are just running plays. You don't got to worry about that. Plays with like fewer receiver option routes so that everybody's always going to be on the same page. You can call plays that can overcome that. And I would imagine that there's going to be some element of that in the offense going forward. But yeah, I don't think 2 weeks kind of resolves like making sure that everybody's on the same page.
Yeah. Damian Barrett asks, with Dobbs confirmed as starting quarterback, any suggestion that his struggles in the last 2 games were as a result of him having too much autonomy over play calling? Should the Vikings revert to having him being a literal meat puppet and just acting as Kevin O'Connell's on-field avatar?
I don't know, one way or the other for a fact what the case is with regards to his autonomy. But were I to venture a guess, I'd say with like 95% confidence that he has no autonomy, that he does not really call plays. Like I'm sure, the offense, his absorption of the offense has essentially evolved enough that he might be able to call 2 plays in the huddle and then kill the first play to go to the second if the look is bad. Like I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case, but like Cousins can just call a play if he wants. He's like done that, right? I don't think Dobbs has that at all. That would shock me. So I don't think there's any level of autonomy he has there. I think it's just like Dobbs has been a very high volatility quarterback. He had 2 of the best games that we've ever seen a Cardinals quarterback have since 2015. I shouldn't say ever, since 2015. This season. Like he had 2 incredible quarterbacking games that are probably better than anything Kyler Murray's put together, certainly better than anything that we've seen since like Carson Palmer's almost MVP season. He also had 2 of the worst games that we've seen from a Cardinals quarterback in the last 7 or 8 years, which is saying a lot. Like they had like Drew Stanton back there, right? Like it's Derek Anderson, right? Who had to defend the fact that he laughed on the sideline. Like they were like, hey, you should be sad. Like I saw you play. That was devastating. That was tragic. Why aren't you sad? Like that kind of stuff, right? Like he had some he's just a high volatility, high variance quarterback. So like the Vikings happened to catch a wave where he played out of his mind for 2 games. And then he played, pretty poorly against the Broncos and really poorly against the Bears. So it just happens.
Also from Damian Barrett, now that James is a published writer, how soon can we expect him to be snapped up by The Athletic, and which beat will he cover?
It's not like the first thing that's ever been published by you, right? Like I feel like you've written other stuff.
Boy, I actually, well, not for blog purposes, no. I think this is actually, because I never wrote anything for The Norseman.
Well, right, no, not for The Norseman, but like I'm thinking about like college newspaper type stuff.
No.
Nothing from your AV department? Oh, okay, sure.
Nope, nothing. I take that back. I wrote a few things for a few articles for a UND thing that was awful back when I worked there. But I suppose that's the
Perfect.
only actual stuff. So this isn't technically the first time, but I did write something for the Substack to introduce people to the Hell League, and then we're going to do kind of some deep dives as to the playoffs coming up, which should be
fun,
incredibly entertaining. And maybe it promotes the Hell League, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it just terrifies people. Maybe people will open it up on a Thursday morning just out of morbid curiosity to see what happened with this ridiculous, there was a missed extra point. I wonder if that affected it. Like, this
right,
is
it should be fun. The pieces are going to be free. So even if you're not subscribed to the Substack, you'll be able to read them just to get kind of updates on how the Hell League is doing.
Yep, it's time to open this up to more people. And if a national writer isn't going to be handling Hell League stuff, I believe this is my beat. So we're gonna see how this goes. As for The Athletic, I don't know. I'm a union man. I don't know if I can work for The Athletic.
Hey, they might get absorbed in the New York Times union. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who's to say?
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci. Bob Marks asks, how many fumbles will Madison have against the Raiders?
That's a good question.
Over under 1.5?
Yeah, I would say over under 1.5. I would probably take the under there and shoot for like 1, but it's on the table.
It's very, I kind of like the over on that.
That's rough.
Just, it ends up being a rough day, obviously. But Jay Ruckett asks, what do you think the plan is for next year for the safety position? Feels a bit crowded there, and any trade value in the position?
So first of all, I wouldn't ever worry about it being crowded at the safety position just because the Vikings are like fielding 3 safeties, right? So like they can absorb a little bit of a larger safety room than they typically do. So yeah, there's like some like interesting scenarios, right? So like, for example, Jay Ward, a rookie this year, hasn't played that many snaps, is a safety. He's in the safety room. He meets with the cornerback sometimes. He sometimes plays quarterback, but primarily he's a safety, right? He is behind Theo Jackson, who is essentially the fourth safety on the roster. First round pick Lewis Cine, also behind Theo Jackson. You've got like some players that there have been pretty recent investments in. They just signed an extension from Josh Metellus. They have Cam Bynum under contract, I think until 2025, I think that offseason. It looks like he's a free agent then. And Harrison Smith, I believe, until 2026. Let me check. Yeah, 2026. At which point Josh Metellus and Lewis Cine will also be up. But in 2024, I don't think that there's going to be really any movement there. Maybe they'll draft a guy to compete with like Lewis Cine. I don't know, but like, maybe that could be a third, fourth round pick. And then cut Lewis Cine at the end of camp, because this is about the time that first round picks, if they don't produce, get cut. But I don't think they're going to make any trades in the offseason or anything like that to remove safeties from the room unless they get a good offer for somebody like Lewis Cine. But yeah, it might seem like a crowded room, but the Vikings play three safeties. You'd expect to have as many safeties in that scenario as most teams have cornerbacks. And that's what they have. So I don't think that there's any concern there about having to make some moves to lighten the load or make the room a little bit less crowded, just because of how important they seem to be to the nature of the defense. Plus, I mean, it seems like the Vikings just kind of, if Brian Flores is the defensive coordinator next year, which I expect him to be, because I don't think he's going to be a head coach, and we'll see. Hopefully he gets interviews. They do a pretty good job of adapting to the players that they have. They're like, hey, our linebackers suck? Great, we just won't play them. We got some good safeties. We'll play those guys instead. And it just kind of works. So, hey, if they have to lose out on some safeties, they'll adapt. They'll be fine.
Next question is from Not Your Father's Dopamine, who asks, on a scale of 1 to David Tepper, where do you think the Wilf family, that's a heck of a scale, where do you think the Wilf family falls in terms of micromanaging the team? And should the government nationalize the NFL?
Well, I did the second question, obviously. This is clearly. It should be like a worker owned, but it doesn't matter. Nationalizing is better than the model that we have. So the Wilf family, obviously they're not like completely hands off. We actually have very few completely hands-off owners now in the NFL, but we've had hands-off owners in the past. But they're like relatively hands-off, right? Like I would argue, for example, that, Jimmy Haslam intervenes more in the running of his team at a micro level, right? Than the Wilfs. Obviously the Snyders did, but maybe the Walton Penner group with the Broncos are more hands-off. Maybe Josh Harris with Washington is a bit more hands-off. I don't know. We'll see how those teams, like that ownership era, play out for both of those teams. But we know that the Bears ownership, the Hallases are pretty involved, but not like at a micro level. And that's kind of where I think the Vikings are. It's, the ownership is like active, but they're not micromanaging. And so they've got like some dictates, right? They're like, yeah, you got to compete every year. We're not a team that's ever going to blow it up or rebuild. We need to be competitive, but how you decide to do that is like up to you. If you don't think we need to invest in a quarterback, I'm going to trust you to do that. If you do think we need to invest in a quarterback, I'm going to trust you to do that. If you need cash flow up front in order to attract the players that you need, we'll have the cash on hand to do that. If you need to manipulate the cap in some way and you don't need cash up front, that's fine with us. We'll put it in escrow, but we'll have it available if you need it. That kind of stuff, right? Like they are very active in searches for head coaches and general managers. They tell them very clearly what the expectations are, and then they give them the resources to kind of do it. And they're just kind of okay with that. They clearly took in a lot of feedback from the people who run the team, not just like the front office, but like all of operations, on what a facility needs. And then they built that facility. And that's why they've got like an A+ on the NFLPA report card. They have all of the things that players are looking for from a team, from an operation standpoint. So I think they're more open to feedback. But what's interesting is I do want to add a lot of people. So when this Tepper report came out, so people are familiar. I believe it was The Athletic. I think it was Joseph Person at The Athletic reported that David Tepper would micromanage the team pretty significantly, to the point where people were playing kind of politics by revealing stuff to Tepper and then having him use that information in some way. And so the example that I tweeted out that a bunch of people tweeted out that kind of blew up was that I guess the general manager told David Tepper that the problem with Bryce Young is that his footwork isn't working. Like, it's not good footwork for what the offense is demanding that he be able to do, which, I would argue, like, that is both true and also, like, you got it. Like, it's hard to have good footwork with a bad offensive line. But the coaching staff, which has like a bunch of former quarterbacks on it, a bunch of people were talking about how great this coaching staff was before the season. Frank Reich and Josh McCown, and I think there's another former quarterback on the staff. Like, hey, all of these guys. I mean, this is exactly how they developed Carson Wentz. A success story, I guess. But all of these guys, will be able to and they made an active, conscious decision to say, hey, there's some mechanical things we need to fix, but we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on this other element that we think takes a higher priority, whether it's like familiarity with the offense or whatever it is, right? And Tepper says, you got to fix this guy's footwork. The owner goes to the head coach, says, hey, it's a priority. You got to fix this guy's footwork. And that's crazy. Like, there's like Jimmy Haslam telling the front office to draft a specific quarterback. That's like a lot of intervention micromanaging, right? That is, you're advising them on, admittedly an important, but not even advising, you're intervening on a player acquisition decision, which is a fairly micro-ish level thing to intervene on. But this is like a coaching point. This is extremely detailed micromanaging, right? And when I tweeted that out, I got a couple of responses and quote tweets that are just like, Tepper is what people think Jerry Jones is, or some other reference to Jerry Jones. And while I do think that sentence is correct, I think that a lot of that comes from a misunderstanding of who Jerry Jones is right now as an owner. I think prior, like 10 years ago, you could make the argument that Jerry Jones was like very like micromanaging and all that. And that would have been fair, right? But I'm trying to remember the name of like the team president, Will something. Team president, let me take a look. Will McClay. So vice president of player personnel, not team president. I believe Stephen Jones, his son, is the team president. But like, there's an example of Jerry Jones. I think it might have even been a Johnny Manziel example. So like Jimmy Haslam wanted Johnny Manziel, so that's who the Browns got. But it sounded like the Dallas Cowboys wanted him, but the Dallas Cowboys didn't want him. Jerry Jones wanted him. And Jerry Jones says, hey, I want to get Johnny Manziel. And Stephen Jones says no. And Jerry says, okay. And that's still kind of an intervention, right? You're making an active, like, it changes the organization when you say, hey, I want this guy. But if they feel empowered to say stuff like no, and Jerry Jones is like, all right, oh my God, that's like way less than I think a lot of people understand Jerry Jones to be. And the reason I wanted to bring up Will McClay is because he has become a critical part of why the Cowboys are good now. Like, he has been a huge part of their ability to acquire players, especially in the draft, that are big positives in a lot of ways. And so he has done a lot of the legwork, and teams have tried to hire Will McClay. I think for the past 3 years, teams have tried to hire Will McClay to be their general manager, and Will McClay has turned them down, presumably because Jerry Jones keeps on giving him raises. And I don't think Will McClay would stay with the Cowboys if he's had his ability, his pick of teams over the past 3 years, if he did not have autonomy. Like, if he has the ability to make choices with the Cowboys and he gets more pay, he'll do that. If he gets more pay but he doesn't get to make choices, a lot of people in his position, I think probably including him, would have left the Cowboys to be able to spread their wings, right? So that's probably, I think, a lot of it. But the fact that Will McClay plays an important role at all suggests that he has autonomy. So the Cowboys are not really this organization that's run like a lot of people think it is. It did used to be. But then the Cowboys were bad, and Jerry Jones is like, well, this isn't working. And yeah, admittedly, he promoted his son to a decision-making role. And like, it sounds like you still got your fingers in the pie. But it very clearly, his son can just be like, nope, we're not doing that. And he'll be like, no, all right. You call the shots, I guess.
Yeah. Paul asks, as of today, how many first-round quarterback prospects are we looking at? If the Vikings miss out on the first-round quarterbacks, would it be a good idea for them to draft one in round 2 or 3?
So yeah, I haven't done the consensus board or anything like that, but we can take a look at some of the boards that are out there. And there's a lot of quarterbacks that, could potentially be drafted for the 2024 draft. People have talked a lot about Caleb Williams. They've talked a lot about Drake May. Those are the 1 and 2. Who knows? Maybe. Also, Michael Penix, the quarterback out of Washington. Bo Nix, the quarterback out of Oregon. They've both been talked about as potential first rounders. JJ McCarthy has kind of occasionally been talked about as a potential first rounder. I don't think he is, but people have put him into the first round. So that's something. Jaden Daniels out of LSU, I think, is eligible. I don't know if people expect him to declare or not. But he was like a Heisman favorite for a while. And personally, I think, based off of what little college football I've seen, I think he should win it, but I haven't seen very much. But he's somebody that people put in the first or second round. To me, he seems like a first rounder. Again, I haven't watched very much. But those are like that group of 6 has come up a lot as potential first rounders. In the second round, probably some of those players will be second rounders. I think personally, Nix and Penix are both second rounders. I think for age reasons, as well as like injury concerns and like 1 year wonder. Well, Penix has been good for a couple of years, and Bo Nix played really well last year. But they weren't originally as successful as they are now later in their careers. So I think that probably plays a role in them dropping to the second. I think it was possible that Jordan Travis could have declared this year, but after he's the Florida State quarterback, so after his injury, I think there's a pretty good possibility he returns. But who knows, right? Some people talked about Sam Hartman from Notre Dame for a while. I don't see him as a first or second rounder or anything like that, but that name has popped up. I know that Tennessee's Joe Milton's, his name has popped up. I think that probably he's a 4th, 5th rounder, but he's supposed to have this like great arm, So Spencer Rattler was invited to the Senior Bowl, and I believe he accepted it. So that's essentially declaring. So he's the South Carolina quarterback. I think he's originally at Oklahoma. He had like one really great season, and then it just kind of dropped off. He could become a second rounder. To me, he's probably also a 3rd, 4th rounder. But yeah, there's a lot of quarterbacks like this. Quinn Ewers out of Texas, maybe. I don't know. I think he's eligible. He might be able to declare. He could be a 2nd, 3rd rounder. But yeah, the first 6 that I named are really the first, second round group as far as I understand it.
Next question is from Logan Bolsharif, who asks, question for Aaron Packer's quarterback corner. Since Sunday night, I keep seeing that Jordan Love is good now. What the hell? You said he was bad. You betrayed me. Why did you do this? Also, is he good now?
I don't think he's good now. I think he's hit a stretch of good play. One thing to kind of keep in mind is that the Packers have played, as Jordan Love has played very well or has produced a lot, I should maybe say, over the past couple of games. The Packers have played the Chargers, which is the worst passing defense in the NFL, the Lions, which are a crazy team, right? It's really difficult to figure out, if that week the Lions will be good at defense. And the Chiefs, who have a very good defense. So, great. And he played extremely well against the Chiefs. I also think he's getting the benefit of the doubt on a lot of throws. I think he throws a lot of dangerous passes that over the past couple of weeks have landed in his receivers' hands. But I think against the Chiefs, he threw like this one into triple coverage to Romeo Doubs that he couldn't see. Like he couldn't see where that pass was going. And it happened to hit Doubs in the numbers. Okay. I don't think that's repeatable. That's just me, but I don't think that that's happening a ton. And so I need to see a little bit more from Jordan Love that don't involve games against like the worst passing defense in the NFL. He had a 3-0 touchdown interception ratio against the Chiefs. Again, that's a very good defense. They had some injuries in that game, but I don't want to focus too much on the fact that they I don't think they had either of their top 2 safeties. They're a good defense, right? But I still think that there's more to come. And I think a lot of this is Matt LaFleur doing a pretty good job getting players into advantageous positions and scheming them open than it is, I think, Jordan Love playing out of his mind. But hey, I could be wrong about this. Packers fans have been finding my tweets, making fun of him, and responding to me. So they're very aware of what my take is.
Yeah. VH Cadet asks, question for a Reeves coaching fire pit corner.
No.
Robert Saleh had to dismiss reports that Zach Wilson was hesitant to start for the Jets again after being benched and unbenched multiple times while allowing Nathaniel Hackett to call plays. Is this the end for Saleh? And honestly, can we blame Zach Wilson, who has now shown some flashes, I don't remember seeing flashes, of why they drafted him at number 2 and clearly needs to be almost anywhere else than this dumpster fire? Bonus question, which team will be the new Browns of ineptitude, allowing other teams to hide behind their incompetence? I think the Browns are still the Browns of ineptitude. As far as personnel.
They really screwed that up. Like they rode this like wave of Baker Mayfield taking her to the playoffs, and the defense is great. The Browns defense is phenomenal, right? But yeah, I think the Browns are still the Browns of ineptitude until they like have multiple consecutive seasons of like making the playoffs and maybe winning a couple of games. They're the Browns still, but the Jets are still up there. The Jets are still the Jets, right? So they can be used to allow other teams to shield their own incompetence by pointing to the Jets, like, hey, at least we don't have a sequel to the butt fumble, right?
Can you really fire Robert Saleh after Aaron Rodgers got injured on I say freak play that we all knew this was coming on like the 4th or 5th play of the season? Like, I think
you can, because I think that like he's been given a lot of chances before this, and so this is what I said. So I was on the Purple Insider podcast with Matthew Collar, and this is what I said about the way to evaluate coaches when you're forced to go to your backup quarterback, which is that you create kind of a baseline level of expectation for the fact that you have a backup. Right, so your starter, you're expected to win a bunch of games, go to the playoffs, right? That's the expectation. That's who you judge them against. Now you don't have that quarterback anymore. You go to a backup. Well, what's the expectation for a backup quarterback? I would say at the high end, it's the 25th best passing game in the NFL or something like that. At the low end, obviously 32nd. Where are you compared to that? Like, what are you doing given the fact that you have this really high level defense, given the fact that you've got one of the most exciting young receivers in the NFL? How are you doing? And I think that based off of that expectation, they are performing below expectation. And there's been a bunch of stuff about Robert Saleh being not that great of a coach over the past couple of years. And this is kind of the culmination of that. So you don't like if or when he gets fired, it's not because they didn't win as many games as people expected them to at the beginning of the season, because he handled the loss of a quarterback really poorly. Tim Boyle was like just waived. Like they benched Zach Wilson, started Tim Boyle, and he played so horribly that they cut him. Like they didn't say, oh, okay, you're the backup again. Sorry. They were like, oh, you're not rosterable. Oh my gosh. We can't even put you on the practice squad. Bye. Like that's nuts that the guy that you started gets cut entirely. Not even like relegated to a backup role or anything, just cut. That's nuts. You should know that Tim Boyle is bad at football. You got to know that. He was in practice. We have NFL film of him playing football. It's not wonderful stuff. Like, what is he doing up there, right? Like, that's handling that poorly. Benching Zach Wilson for Tim Boyle and then saying, we believed in Zach Wilson the whole time, we just needed a spark. Was Tim Boyle going to provide that spark? And if he wasn't, why is he on the team? Like, that's the kind of, like, that's nuts that they did that poorly. Also, for Zach Wilson showing flashes, yeah, okay, I would argue that he did show a flash or two, but, like, you can't live off of that, right? Like, Jamarcus Russell showed flashes. Everyone shows flashes, right? Zach Wilson's play has improved compared to his rookie year, but not like enough for it to mean anything. And a lot of that improvement has evaporated. It was the first couple of games that he had to play where we were like, hey, he's improved. I'm not saying he's good. He's not, but he's improved. And even those improvements have like withered away. That sounds like coaching to me. Yeah. But yeah, so can we blame Zach Wilson? I find this interesting because I remember one of the famous stories about Kurt Warner was that when he was with the Packers as an undrafted quarterback, the coaches asked him to go in and take some reps in practice. And he said, no, I'm not ready. And when that story is told, everybody is like, wow, that takes a lot of balls to do that. That shows like self-awareness. commitment to character. He doesn't want to let his teammates down because other people, like receivers, are relying on him to do what's executed of him, whatever. And when Zach Wilson does the same thing, we're all like, F that guy. He's not a team player. I can't believe he did that. And obviously it's different, like starting a game versus not doing a practice, and the expectations for a second overall pick are different than an undrafted. Like, I get that there's a bunch of different contexts involved here. But it just feels like, we interpret a lot of things differently for almost essentially no reason at all. And I think that Zach Wilson saying no, I very much understand it. And by the way, like that's been resolved. He's going to start, for better or worse, I guess. But like that doesn't mean it like makes sense, right? But I very much understand it. It's just like weird to be like, but you benched me twice. I'm good. I'm good. That's so weird. And multiple times Robert Saleh has had to address Zach Wilson being reluctant. Well, that is a coaching problem. That is true. But also multiple times, that's weird. That's weird. Like, what is up, man?
I'm just waiting waiting for the Zach Wilson presser where he's blinking out torture in like it's just full on SOS, like in Morse code in front of the cameras. Like he's doing this under duress. Someone has like kidnapped his family, and he in order to like get them back, he has to play this weekend for the Jets.
I mean, that's on the table.
Chris asks, what is the highest number of quarterbacks making starts across the league in the past 10 years? Making reference to the large number of backups we've seen this year.
So the last time I talked about the high number of backup quarterbacks that were playing, I think it was 2019 or something like that. Or I think it was like 2017. Either way, I put all the numbers together, and it turns out it actually was not the highest over that span of time. This year, it feels like a lot of backups are playing. For sure, it definitely feels like that. It feels like a lot of quarterbacks have taken snaps this year. And in a sense, yeah, that's true. But we actually had more quarterbacks taking snaps, or starting, I should say, not even taking snaps, starting in the NFL last year than we do this year. Also in 2021, also in 2020, also in 2019. All of those have seen more quarterbacks take snaps than in 2023. Now, mind you, the season's not over yet, right? Like 2022 benefits from the fact that there were more games to play than any other season, right? And we haven't had, we're at week 13, 14, right? We haven't had, week 17, week 18 conclude. So if you model it out, or not model it out, if you like divide by the number of games and then multiply by the number of games left, technically 2023 can exceed 2022, but that's not really how that works. But that's the closest we can get to it. 2022 had obviously a bunch of quarterbacks playing, but like remember like Sam Darnold and Cooper Rush and Joe Flacco again, and the 49ers had a bunch of quarterbacks. This is only regular season, so it doesn't include like Josh Johnson, right? Trubisky started a couple of games. Desmond Ridder and Marcus Mariota started for the Falcons. PJ Walker started for the Panthers. Tyler Huntley started for the Ravens for a little bit. Jameis Winston started a couple of games for the Saints. Sam Ehlinger, the Colts had like 3-4 quarterbacks start in 2022. The Titans had, 3 start last year, just like they did this year. We had a bunch of quarterbacks start for the Cardinals, just like we did this year. Brett Rippon started for the Broncos. Like, there's a bunch of stuff last year where we're just like, oh yeah, that guy played. Not a ton, but he played. Like that happened. Jarrett Stidham started for the Raiders. Multiple games too. Like, these happened. Trace McSorley started a game for the Cardinals. Anthony Brown started a game for the Ravens in place of Tyler Huntley. Nick Foles, of course, started a game. Skylar Thompson for the Dolphins. Teddy Bridgewater for the Dolphins. Like, John Wolford started for the Rams. Like, we had a bunch of players start games. We just like get kind of caught up in like, hey, I expected these guys to start and they didn't. And it feels like there's a lot of backups. And I guess that's true. But really, compared to like the last 4 years, we haven't had that number of starters yet. We've had 53 starters. The record over the past decade is 69. Nice. and that was last year. We're on track for 69.4. Nice. But we're not there yet. So the highest number is 2022, followed by 2021, followed by 2020, followed by 2019.
So next question is from Kyle Segal, who has decided to go back to writing into us, and it's always nice to hear from Kyle and all the Florida man things that he seems to involve himself. He asks, first off, what's the over-under on the airmail passes that'll be soaring helplessly over Jefferson's head on Sunday?
2.5.
Yeah. Also, he asks, if FSU boycotts the Orange Bowl by accepting the bid, going, and then just refusing to play, how hard would the NCAA come down on them, and would it be hard enough to justify not doing the intentionally hilarious/righteous thing?
That one's interesting because I don't really know how governance works in the bowl games, because the NCAA, my understanding is that they're not supposed to be involved in the bowls, right? Like they're not involved, but they are, because they can deny you bowl eligibility for either violations or for jumping divisions, I guess. So they are involved in bowl games, but all of the bowls are independently administered. I would guess that you could call this a violation of the game's integrity, and the NCAA could come down on you. I would also guess that the Orange Bowl Committee, or whatever corporation the Orange Bowl has incorporated as, I don't know what it's called, but each of these bowls are their own separate company, could sue FSU. And that would, I could see them winning that suit, because it's like you're violating like a good faith clause of your contract or whatever. But it's kind of, if all the players decide to do it without the knowledge of the coaches, kind of hard to sue the institution. But that's like, all of those things are in play, at least. But I would think that the NCAA and or the Orange Bowl or whatever would come down pretty hard on them. Would it be hard enough to justify not doing the intentionally hilarious righteous thing? It would be very funny. I don't think it'd be worth it, but I get it.
I think it would be hysterical, and I think they would lose bowl eligibility for 4 years.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
You imagine, like, finally the playoffs expanded to 12 and now you can't play in it?
Yep. It's always raining at FSU. Kevin asks, James Madison hired Holy Cross's Bob Chesney to a 5-year deal for the Duke's head coach. How happy are we?
Well, first of all, I'm mad that the NCAA conspired to funnel funds to Indiana to hire Cignetti away.
What an embarrassment. That they offered so much money, a biblical amount of money, to get him to go over there, destroying the commitments that had already been made to JMU.
I'm stunned. I'm stunned at the base level of corruption here. The NCAA's anti-JMU stance has been noted. Their actions against JMU multiple times, because JMU's appealed some of NCAA's decisions, represent a clear bias against the Dukes. They are terrified of greatness, and I hate it. So they gave Indiana the resources they needed to in order to collude and take Cignetti away from JMU and bring him into the Big Ten. Which I'm not looking forward to Minnesota getting embarrassed by Indiana. I should probably say again, but
Yeah.
But yeah, Holy Crosses has qualified for the playoffs. I think the FCS playoffs 4 of the last 5 years. Guy's pretty successful, but not as successful as like Montana State, and I hate to say it, but NDSU. Or South Dakota State, but pretty successful. It's one of the top FCS programs. I'm curious. I think it pretty much depends on how good Chesney is at recruiting. Because I think that for the most part, the team will otherwise be fine from a coaching perspective. I think recruiting is going to be the one that I'm going to like.
Yeah,
I'm going to be pretty curious about.
Yeah, we'll see. maybe we'll end up at another game next year or something. It would be nice to. It'd be nice to return to the Shenandoah Valley. I would love that.
Yeah, so long as we don't see any more ghost statues.
Yeah, that was. Boy, driving down that highway, there were a lot of interesting names of parks and all that. It was great. Here we go. Kenneth Allen asks, for James's "When you go low, I go lower" corner, what would be the funniest way that a player or Mr. Machine Gun Kelly, sorry, Mr. Gun Kelly, as you refer to him,
Mr. Gun Kelly,
could personally insult Arif? I suppose the first thing that needs to be mentioned is that apparently Machine Gun Kelly and Arif had beef.
I guess. I mean, it's fun to say that because it's like that's a crazy set of words to put together to craft a sentence that is grammatically correct. But he didn't continue responding to me, so I don't know if it's like an extended beef. But we could just label it that and we'll be fine. So some context. So on Travis Kelce's podcast, he and I guess Machine Gun Kelly are friends. They're both from Ohio, which I don't know. There's a bunch of people from Minnesota I'm not friends with, so I don't know if that's like the basis for a friendship. But fine. And he's on the podcast, and at the end of the podcast, he's like, "I gotta ask, can I get you to play for the Browns?" And he's like, "I'll throw in like $500,000 for shopping. You can buy whatever you want, and also $500,000 split between the two high schools that we went to." And it's like that's like a crazy offer, right? Because like Travis Kelce makes like $60 million plus. He makes $634,000 every Sunday this year. Like that's like a nuts. He makes more money on Sunday than Machine Gun Kelly offered. And so I pointed this out. I was like, his game check is like more than that. That's like a crazy, that's a dumb incentive to provide. I should also note that in addition to the $1 million he put up, half to Travis Kelce, half to the two high schools, he also offered free like breakfast delivery from the restaurants he owns in the area. So, okay, cool. It's very important that I get this right because that was the concern that a number of Machine Gun Kelly fans had. It's strange. Like sometimes there are like some celebrities where I'm just like, okay, I get like why you're popular, but I don't get why you have stans. Like I get like, okay, your music is like whatever, but it's enough to get a bunch of airplay. People are going to enjoy it. People kind of resonate with it. But like, why do you have like stans? Like I get why Jared Leto has stans, right? But I don't get like why Machine Gun Kelly does. Like that's anyway, there's like a bunch of those in my mentions. And they're very concerned about me getting the story correct. So I just want to make sure. So I was like, that's like, what in the world is like my tweet? I like tweeted it out. That tweet got, so this is like a banal observation. It's just like, yeah, he makes more every week than that. Why would you offer that? Why would that mean anything? And that tweet got 25,000 likes or something like that. I think it's at 27 now. Like what? That's crazy that went viral. That's nuts to me that went viral. So he saw it and he responded to me and he said, "Tell me you're dumb without telling me you're dumb." And he spells "you're" wrong both times. And so I'm like, so I quote tweet it with like, "Thank you, Machine Gun Kelly."
Thank you, Mr. Gun Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Gun Kelly. So he ended up quote tweeting somebody another story, not even the Rolling Stone story I quote tweeted, some other story, I guess, where he is like, people misunderstand me. I was going to offer the $500,000 on top of the player fee that the team would pay him. And it's like, I don't think anyone misunderstood that. I don't think anyone thought you were trying to replace his salary. But like, you offer, like, if you offered me $1,000 to uproot my life and move to like Cleveland, Ohio, that's the equivalent, right? Like, you offered him $500,000. That's like offering me $1,000 to like move, to make the same amount of money. No, that sucks. That's stupid. I'm not going to do that. There's a difference, right? Because proportions are different. Like it costs more than $1,000 to move. It does not cost more than $500,000 to move. But again, you're offering less than a week's salary for this guy to move. So I don't think anyone was confused about that. But okay, I guess you thought that everyone thought that you were going to replace his salary with a $500,000 shopping spree. Okay. So a bunch of people went back and forth. And that's actually, I don't think I called him Mr. Gun Kelly. I think it was somebody else that I quote tweeted that I called him Mr. Gun Kelly. But yeah, I fought a little bit with former rapper turned pop punk musician. I don't know. His music's like not very good. So
I assumed he died after Eminem dissed him, so I thought that was the kill shot. I thought that was it. So
I thought Eminem didn't have anything left in the tank after Rap God, and I was wrong. Eminem killed the guy.
Yeah. Also, for Reef's dual loyalty corner, I know it was a while ago, but what did you make of Staley's post Green Bay?
No, hold on. We got to address the when you go low, I go lower thing.
Okay.
So that comes from Jamal Adams. I don't know if people are familiar with this one. So Connor Hughes, who covers the Jets, quote tweeted, I think the official NFL account of somebody scoring on Jamal. I already forgot. Somebody scored on Jamal Adams in one-on-one coverage. And it was pretty bad. Jamal Adams misplayed the ball pretty badly. So it was a touchdown. And he just quote tweets with yikes. And Jamal Adams responded to him with a picture of his wife and said yikes, which is crazy. Like that's nuts. Like here's a football reporter reporting on you not doing your job that well, and as a football player, and your response is to like go after this dude's family. And a bunch of Seahawks reporters asked like Pete Carroll about this, and Pete Carroll was like, yeah, I don't know what that's about, but you can't do that. So we told him not to do it. He'd already taken the tweet down by the time we told him not to do it. And I'm not going to look into it, which is all right, Pete, that's your prerogative. You don't have to look into this like very strange behavior. And Jamal Adams was like, this guy's had it out for me since day one, which I've seen Connor's reporting. That's not true. But Jamal Adams, you did not play well enough for you to do all this. And there are criticisms of your ability in coverage. That's the whole deal. And he said, I wish I didn't have to bring his wife into it. And Bud, you didn't have to. You chose to do that. Honestly, if you had quote tweeted him with the picture of his face and said yikes, that would have been way more above board. Because she didn't do anything wrong, man. She's a fully realized human. Like, you get that, right? Like, she didn't have to be in the crosshairs because she didn't do anything. If you have a beef with Connor Hughes, which clearly you think you do, right? I guess Connor has had it out for you since your rookie year. I don't think that's true. I've read his writing. We were colleagues at The Athletic. And I talked to him a decent amount. I asked him for advice and stuff. And I read the way that he reported on Jamal Adams. He did not have it out for you. But players, develop chips in their shoulder wherever they need to, right? Like Tom Brady is probably telling a story right now about the 6 quarterbacks that were drafted ahead of him, right? But like there's something kind of revealing about this where like the wife, like it very much feels like a person's family is their property. So I can make fun of the family because I'm making fun of the person. Like they're not their own humans. Like there's that element to it. But yeah, like it would have been weird for you to like call Connor ugly. But at least it's like about the guy you're beefing with. It is insanely weird to call his wife ugly, which let's be clear, that's what he's doing. When you quote tweet with a picture of somebody's wife and say, yikes, then 100% that's what you're doing, right? We don't need to like play pretend like, oh, technically he didn't. Yeah, he did. 100% he did. That's an insane thing to do. And then to kind of like defend it, to be like, hey man, he went after me. I had to do it. No, you didn't. And it's like, yeah, now he knows not to mess with me. Are you kidding? You clearly don't know this guy at all. First of all, if you did that to me, like I would 100% keep going after you. That's a crazy thing to do. And now it's personal, right? But also I got crazy clicks off of that. I got great engagement off of beefing with you. I'm going to keep doing it, right? Like you didn't offer him any incentive to stop, and you think that you did. But like second, like that's not. Do you think you're like Ender Wiggins? Do you think that you ended the fight by going overboard? This like disproportionate response thing is nuts to me. And like there were some people who defended it, and it's just like I don't understand the way that your brain works. That is like crazy disrespectful to do that. And he's like, yeah, Connor disrespected me, so I disrespected him. And it's like, no, you didn't. You disrespected his family, and that's way different. They didn't do jack. That's nuts. Anyway, that's where the quote comes from. When you go low, I go lower, is what he said in the interview with Seattle media, which that's worthy of criticism. Like you say, he says that like that's just like a thing about me. Like that's just who I am. Yeah, the thing, if that's who you are, you need to change and grow as a person. Like you can't just say that's who I am and just like leave it there. Like that's the problem, is that that's who you are. Anyway, I'm done.
You feel better now that you got that off your chest?
I don't even know Connor's wife. That's just a nuts thing to do.
Let's go to Arif's dual loyalty corner. I know it was a while ago, but what did you make of Staley's post Green Bay presser? It seemed like he blamed players for execution, insisted the coaching wasn't at fault, and a lot of hostility toward the media. It feels like a dead man talking.
Yeah, so for the last 5 games, I'd covered the Chargers. Now Michael Peterson, who runs the SB Nation blog, Bulge from the Blue, is back from paternity leave. So he's handling all the stuff that I was handling. There's like some potential that I could go back because there's like, staffing, challenges that they anticipate going forward. We'll see. But right now I'm not doing anything for the Chargers. But when I was covering the Chargers, after the Green Bay game, he got kind of testy. And it happened the same day that the Vikings were playing the Broncos. So I was like in person talking to Dusty and James and Aaron about this. I was like, this is crazy. Have you seen this? And I like played the video and quoted him. Like it was like nuts that he did that. So what happens is, so they lose the game to the Packers, and reporters are asking questions like, hey, so you've been pretty adamant about, calling the defense, and the defense like failed here. You got the worst passing defense in the NFL, and the Packers were, at this point, Jordan Love had played like one good game. He was like at the beginning of this streak, right? But for the most of the year, Jordan Love had not been playing well, right? And he eviscerates the Chargers defense. And so reporters are like, hey, so you call the defense. You're also the head coach. You made a lot of head coaching mistakes, right? Like challenges. He has been so bad about challenges, by the way. Like he doesn't call challenges when he absolutely needs to. And then he calls challenges when it makes no sense to, or there's like no impact on the challenge, right? Like sometimes I was critical of like Mike Zimmer of like I remember one specifically. There was like a Justin Jefferson deep ball. I forget who it was against. Justin Jefferson deep ball. It was initially ruled a touchdown, or he was ruled out at the 1, and it looked like it could have been a touchdown. And Mike Zimmer challenged it to be a touchdown. It was like a 50, 60-yard pass, right? So it was first and inches if you fail the challenge. And it's like, okay, the odds of you winning the challenge, they're kind of high. But the result is like not that meaningful because the percentage odds that you score a touchdown from first and inches, 80, 90%. Like the numbers are well in your favor. There's no reason for you to potentially waste a challenge. And he wasted the challenge, but whether or not he was right is kind of immaterial. There's like a lot of challenges where Brandon Staley makes a challenge and it's like, yeah, this is like the difference between like 2nd and 5 and 3rd and 3. Like, why would you do this? Like, yeah, maybe they got it wrong, but like, why would you do this? And he doesn't call a challenge on like a clear catch for a first down on 3rd down. Like, you don't have anything to lose. So like, he's not focusing on those things. His time management's pretty bad. He seems to not have a good understanding of the flow of the offense. And the defense is bad. So he's calling the defense. And so they're like, hey, have you thought about, giving up defensive play calling? And he goes off. He's like, I'm not giving up defensive play calling. You can stop asking that. And if he just stopped there, that would have been like, oh, it's kind of spicy. And he just kept going. He's like, I'm never going to give up defensive play calling. You keep asking me this every week. I tell you the same answer every week, so you can stop asking. And he just keeps going. It's like crazy. And he's just like mad at the media. And it's like, bro, you had a team that was like a favorite for the first wild card spot in the AFC. And they are like 5-7 or whatever. Like, you're in the middle of a losing streak. You are misplacing your anger. The media is asking you tough questions because you're losing. And that's a you thing. I've seen coaches get mad at the media during losses. I covered Mike Zimmer. And it's like, it doesn't go well. Like, there are coaches that get mad after losses and they find ways to like redirect that at like themselves. And like, that sounds unhealthy, but actually it's quite healthy. Because at least you're not externalizing it on people who had nothing to do with it. It does feel like a dead man talking. You're correct, Kenneth.
Yeah.
But dual loyalty is a crazy thing to say, by the way.
Screenshot Quarterback Exposer asks, and I don't even know what that implies.
I don't know what that means.
I really need to hear James pronounce the word pumpernickel. Can he do that for me? I guess I did.
Yeah, I'm missing a reference here.
I know nothing, but I'm glad I could make your day. Finally, from the Fraternal Order of the NKVD, for a Reef's bee corner, it's well known that the surplus of bee labor is stolen by plants, pollination, bears, and humans, honey. Yet, they also live in a feudal society under the domination, or rather under the dominion, of a monarch. Given that bees have lived in this state for countless generations without change, what does that tell us about their relationship to their mode of production? Are they simply content with their social structure and conditions, or are they simply missing the emergence of the bee Dutch Republic forged into the cauldron of bee Europe?
So this is like obviously a very stupid question. First of all, modes of production, social relations, they all deal with the way humans deal with each other. Bees are eusocial. They're not social, they're eusocial. They're hive minds. The word hive comes from the structure of bee society. It's different, and we just call, like, I've had this right before, we call queen bees queens because we are imposing our understanding of governance onto just some random species, right? And we're like, yeah, that's the queen, because they're the boss. And it's like, that's not really like, it's not like she tells them what to do, right? She doesn't tax them, right? Like, she doesn't own land. The center of the animal interactions, like all animal interactions, are reproduction, and she's the only female that reproduces.
Yeah.
And so it just looks like they're serving, but that's not how it works. They all collectively make decisions, right? I'm sure if the first person who had engaged with bees was a communist, they would have called it something else, right? Like, we wouldn't think of it as bees and drones and workers. Maybe we'd say workers, right? We'd think of them as a collectivist society, maybe, because they collectively make decisions, right? So there's nothing here that you got to worry about in terms of, bee revolution or modes of production. And then also, like, on top of that, like, surplus labor relies on like a concept of value, which, that doesn't necessarily rely on concepts of exchange. There's a whole debate about like the theory of value, the exchange value, labor theory of value, use value, commodity value, different definitions of value. This is all debated in a ton of economics, right? But it all kind of relies on human understandings of the way that we value things. Bees don't like use the excess honey. Like, that's not like a thing that happens. Plants don't steal surplus labor. The point is actually that they work together. Like, that's like saying, I helped my friend build a house and now they live in that house. My friend did not steal my labor in order to live in that house. That's just a thing that happened, that he now lives in the house I helped build. And maybe I'll get something out of it because we have a relationship where we give and take and stuff like that. Like, maybe I get a bunch of hot sauce, right? But like, no one stole anything. That's crazy. No one was coerced into it. These are not like neoliberal voluntary exchanges. These are voluntary exchanges. So yeah, it's not a feudal society. It's more collective than anything. We just impose an understanding of governance on top of them, and now we're making up politics about it. So they're fine. The bees are fine. Well, they're dying, but the social structure is not the reason. There's not the social structure is fine. The bee society is. Other people are killing the bees, is what I'm saying.
The strive to be technically correct is strong.
Okay, yeah, but I know my listeners.
Yeah. Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be back next week to discuss what happened against the Raiders. Arif, odd question, but what could you possibly have to plug?
Yeah. So over at the Wide Left Substack, I am going to put up the Norse Code podcast as its own podcast page on the Wide Left Substack. So it'll have its own thing. If you're already subscribed to the Norse Code podcast via like iTunes or whatever, you don't got to do anything. It'll still go through iTunes. This is just like another way for people to discover and find the podcast. So it'll have its own RSS feed independent of the iTunes thing. If you're already subscribed, you don't got to worry about it. But that'll be up there. The show notes will be replicated there after I put it up on the Daily Norseman. Ben Natan and I also have our own podcast, the relaunch, the Wide Left podcast. And that one, we, of course, discuss the one thing that people are talking about politically, which is Gaza. If you're interested in that, you're interested in that. If you're not interested in that, you could ignore it. James has published a piece about the Hell League and kind of how it came into being and what his plans are for talking about the Hell League on the Wide Left Substack. Luke Braun has published a piece on the Brian Flores defense because of the Kevin Seifert article that came out about how it evolved. I think that's pretty interesting. And then I've got a piece on why the Vikings may have chosen to start Josh Dobbs with a breakdown of the concept of using variance to your advantage as an underdog. There's a bunch of stuff happening over there at the Wide Left Substack that you all can check out.
So that's it for this episode of Norse Code. We'll be back next week. For Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that maybe you should just put that in a garage next time. And we'll be back next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.